Today we are going to create this cool light mode, dark mode toggle only using HTML and CSS. And as you can see, you can for example add this cool effect to the top of your page if you wanted to. Instead of our index.html, we've linked our style.css, and right here we only need one line of code. So we'll say input of type checkbox, and we will give this input of type checkbox an ID of day minus night. Now we can go inside of our style.css file. In case you want to use the exact same images that I'm using, you can just go to the link in the description where I link my GitHub repository, and right here you have the images folder, and you can basically download all of the images if you wanted to. So let's go ahead and style inside of our CSS file, and let's say our body has a width of 100%, a height of 100 viewport height, or let's say this one has a min minus height of 100 viewport height. And let's also say display flex, justify content center, align item center, so this button is centered and we have a better overview. Now we want to define the light mode theme for our entire page. So let's say root, and right here we can say color minus scheme is equal to light. So by default our color scheme is light mode. And now once our root element has, so once this element has an element that has the ID of day night basically, so hashtag day night, that is checked. So once our checkbox is checked, we want to change this color scheme by saying color minus scheme to our dark mode. So now by default we have color scheme of light, and once we change this color scheme to dark mode, so once we check this button, we will change the color scheme to dark mode. Now inside of this body we can use or define different colors for different schemes by using light minus dark, so by using the names of our color schemes. So now we can for example say for the light mode we want to use a background color, so a body color of maybe this one, and for our dark mode we want to use this background color for example. And as you can see now, once I toggle the button, we will get different background colors, and you can obviously do the same for colors for example, and so on. So now let's go ahead and give this button some styling. So let's say for example this button, so let's take this ID and let's say hashtag day minus night has an appearance of none, because we want to clear the default appearance. And I also recommend to use dash webkit minus appearance and set this to none, and dash mouse minus appearance to none to enforce browser support. And now we can say we want to have a height of maybe 225 pixels and a width of 100 pixels for example. Now let's use a background, and for the background I'd really like to use an image. So I'm going to say URL is equal to images, and we're going to go inside of our images folder, and let's just say we are going to use day 3 for example. So now we have this effect. I also want to use a border radius of maybe 50 pixels so we get round borders. And as you can see, we already see the image, but it seems like it's just blue because it's way too big. So what we can do is we can say background minus size is equal to cover. So now we can see this image. Now let's also use box minus shadow to give it a shadow of inset 5 pixels, 5 pixels, 15 pixels of blur, and RGBA of 0, 0, 0, and 0.6. So a form of black basically. So we have this effect. A cursor or pointer would be a lot cooler as well. So we have this effect. And now we need to start to style the circle right here. So in order to do so, we can say hashtag day minus night : after to create an after element. We say content is basically just an empty string. We want to have display of block to be able to give this one a width and a height. So we'll say width is equal to 90 pixels. Why do we choose 90 pixels here? We have a width of 100 pixels in total. So if this one takes up 90 pixels, of those 100 pixels, we still have 10 pixels left that we can use later on to give a gap to the left and to the right. And since we want to have a perfect circle, we say height is 90 pixels as well, and a border radius of 50% to make a perfect circle. So now let's give this one a background color, and I would really like to use the same color that I've basically used for my body. So I'm going to use this one, so for the light mode. So I'm going to say our background has a color of this color code, as you can see. I also want to say that this one should be positioned relative to this day-night element. So we give this one a position of relative, and this one a position of absolute to basically position this one relative to the parent element, which is day-night. And now we can say we want to have a gap of left 0 and top of 5 pixels, and left obviously also 5 pixels, like so. And now we have this effect, which looks pretty cool already in my opinion, but we could also say that we want to use a box shadow. Let's say box shadow inset, and let's only use 0.2 right here. And let's say we want to have an offset of 0 pixels y-axis, offset 0 pixels x-axis, and 20 pixels for the blur, so a little more blur. And now we have this cool effect. Once I hover over this element, I would also like to give this one a little bit more gap to the top. So let's say we are going to copy this in here, and let's say we add the colon hover effect. And once we hover, we want to say top instead of 5 pixels should be 15 pixels. And as you can see now, we get an offset to the top once we hover over this element. A transition would obviously look a little bit better, so we set all 0.5 seconds and ease, so we get this effect, which looks pretty cool already in my opinion. Next up, we want to move this button to the bottom once we click this checkbox basically. Because right now we are just changing the background, but we're not moving this element right here. So we have to do this next by saying hashtag night. We are going to copy this one, and we will say once this is checked, so colon checked, colon after, and once we have this effect, we will change our background, so the background color, to the dark mode background color. Obviously you can use any background color that you want to choose, but I like the dark mode background color, so I use this one. I'm also going to use a back shadow again, but I will put the opacity up a little bit because this looks a lot better on a darker background. And now I also have to give this one a little more gap to the top. And as you can see, we have 225 pixels in total. We have a gap to the top of 5 pixels at the moment, so it would be good to have a gap to the bottom of 5 pixels as well. So we need to consider a width of 95 pixels in total. So what we have to do is we have to say 225 pixels right here for the height minus 95 pixels. So we'll end up with 130 pixels. And as you can see now, this looks perfect. And as you can see, we now get this effect, but I would also like to change the background once this checkbox is checked. And in order to do so, we can say day minus night colon checked. And right here we say background has a URL of images/night3, for example. So now we get this night3 effect. We also need to say background minus size is equal to cover. And now we have this effect, and I think this looks a lot better already. I would also like to have a slight transition between the day and night background, so I will say transition all 0.5 seconds ease. And as you can see, now we even get this cool transition between day and night. And obviously it's up to you whether you want to have this transition or not, but I really like this one. And you can also style those buttons according to your needs if you wanted to. So for example, for the buttons, you could say that you would prefer some form of a dark blue like so, and now you have this pretty cool effect. And obviously you could say you want to have the exact same blue for this background, for example, so for the background, the body background, and just make it a little bit darker, for example. And now we have this pretty cool button effect in my opinion, which allows you to toggle between dark and light mode. Also, it would be cool to have a hover effect to the bottom. So let's say once we hover over this state basically, so once we add colon hover, we are going to remove those two lines, and we just want to add some less space to the top. So maybe we say top 120 pixels, and as you can see now it jumps to the top once we hover, and once we click it completely jumps to the top. So now we have a cool hover effect for our night element and for our day element.